Just saying, Donna.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first ever, on behalf of the German Shepherd Dog Club of America Educational Committee and the German Shepherd Dog Club of Northern Ohio, again, our first ever seminar. I am so excited and stoked to present you with our first program, this time for free. However, we hope to be able to do this at least once a month for everybody, maybe more. Please think about donating to the Parent Club website link. It's in the chat box below so that it gets earmarked for education to be used in the future to bring many more new educational programs for all members. I hope that everybody enjoys this evening. Sit back, relax, make sure you have beverages and snacks, and any feedback that you would like to give us, please do so to our committee. And without further ado, let me introduce our interviewer, Jason McCune, and our breeder handler extraordinaire, Kent Boyles. Have fun, guys.
Thanks, Donna. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We're excited about this. I'd like to thank the GSDC Club of Northern Ohio and Janine for coming with us with this idea. The Education Committee, for sure. This is going to be a great opportunity, I think. We're excited. We're going to discuss multiple things with Mr. Kent Boyles tonight. Just kind of an overview on training and conditioning show dogs, a few other good topics. And without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Mr. Kent Boyles. Kent, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to discuss a few things with us.
Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me on. I think Donna was putting a little bit of a risk out there, telling everybody that they could go at the education committee after we have this discussion, but hey, it's all good. Yeah. Looking forward to it.
All right. So we'll get started here. As always, this is just us having a conversation. It's just our opinions and views. Nothing written in stone. Everyone's got their own views on things. So I'd just like to pick your brain a little bit and get some of your opinions. So let's get started. What drew you into the sport of showing dogs, Kent?
Well, I guess it was I was always fascinated with German Shepherds, and I was always a dog nut as a kid. Had a couple of uncles that had a German Shepherd pet family dog, and I would like to always hang around with those dogs. And finally, I talked my mom into letting me buy a purebred dog when I was 15. So I wrote a few different breeders out of the Dog World magazine, and old Larry Jerome up in northern Wisconsin called me up a couple of days later and talked us into coming up and checking out the dogs at his place. So that's we went from there and did that. And I guess as a kid growing up, my grandfather always had purebred Chesapeakes, and he used to do a lot of field trial stuff with them early before I was around. He did the field trial stuff, but he used to take us hunting with the dogs quite a bit. So I was always around him, and his kennel was next to my house. So it was, pretty involved with the dogs. And then after I went up to Larry's and bought a dog, and after I got a driver's license, I talked him into a job. So then I went up there and spent my summers in high school up there at his place. And I guess after my first summer, then I started bringing some of his dogs back to my home and joining up at the local kennel club and doing obedience. And he had a couple of dogs out with Doug Crane and Ron Gates were the handlers that he was using. So that's how I first got exposed to the dog shows. Hell, I wasn't even familiar with them as a kid, didn't know they existed. So that's kind of a little bit of the background. And once I realized there was guys out there, running around every weekend, traveling, just showing dogs. I mean, hell, I migrated right towards that. I thought that was for me, that was, young kid like that wanted to do stuff. I was all into it. So
that's cool. Kind of how so, what were some of your early accomplishments that really stick to you? Some of your big things early on.
Well, first, I mean, just traveling with those guys to the dog shows and with Douglas at the specialty shows, my job was running around the outside of the ring, calling the dogs that I was taking care of, right? And then as time went on, I got in the ring and started learning a little bit more stuff. The biggest, as time went on and I started showing a few dogs and getting a few clients of my own outside of the ones that I was showing for the Larry that owned the farm. And when I say farm, they had a really extensive Arabian horse breeding program, bred a lot of registered Holstein cows, and had, you know, he had the dogs. That was part of it. So there was a lot of things going on around there, just with the mentality of what they were trying to create from a breeding aspect of it, right? I think I kind of got into the handling of dogs secondary, because first I went up trying to just figure out, because I wanted to learn more about the breed so I could do some responsible breeding, you know, thinking maybe I'd breed 1 or 2 litters or something. And, you know, my lifetime early on is what I was thinking. I didn't even realize there was so much stuff going on, that there was so many opportunities in dogs that you could go down different avenues and actually make a career with them. So then I guess getting back to your question about early accomplishments, you know, were just some of the champions that we finished. And then the thing that really was helpful for my career and got it blasted off pretty good was I had a bitch, Guinevere. I guess she was the Grand Victrix in 1992 out of the American bred bitch class, right? So that was a homebred animal that we had at the national. And by that time too, I probably jump around here a little bit in the story, but the reason I kind of was involved with that animal was because of getting tied up with the Fords. And that was an opportunity that was created because probably, you know, like in the late 80s when I was running around to a lot of the all breed shows, Jim was showing at a lot of all breed shows. And then I met him a few different times, and he was telling me at that time I was living in the northern part of Wisconsin. He's like, dude, you need to wind up going to specialty shows, showing, you know, instead of showing 3 or 4 of these class dogs for that farmer, you could be out there showing 10, 12 dogs at these specialty shows and actually making some money, you know? So he was busy at the all breed dog shows, campaigning the specials, and he turned me on to some, you know, very good clients. Like I got hooked up with the Fords and Fred Migliore, and then the local people were like Dave Reinke and Bob Eaton and Jane Kerner. And I mean, between that whole group, there was a lot of good dogs I had to pick from. So.
Good deal. So I know you mentioned a few of your mentors back then. Like, is there any key things that you really learned that stuck with you a lot, that you still carry on with you today?
Oh, a lot of the things that I was trying to pick up at the time. I mean, some of the people I hung around with quite a bit at that time at specialties that I'd see fairly often, especially when we'd go to like Kansas and Missouri and Iowa, was Neil Given. And Neil was, I thought, always a real good dog guy and a good handler. And we'd spend a lot of times just, you know, after the dog shows, talking about the different animals that were there and the dogs that we had with us. And there was a lot more clients running around, and most of them would show up at the specialties with their own dogs. And, you know, everybody would sit around afterwards, and we'd have a lot more discussions about the judging and the dogs and the shows and the standard and, you know, what was going on. So yeah, Neil was a pretty good influence, I thought, at the time. I in my mid 20s, I suppose, to my early 30s, a lot of the southern dog shows that I'd go to, I spent a lot of time with Don Killey too. And Killey was a good, that guy, man, he loved German Shepherds. They ate, slept, and breathed them, right? And he was a little rough around the edges, but he was a pretty sharp guy. And he you know, we spent a lot of I'd split hotels rooms with him, you know, so we'd both save a few bucks. And Jesus, he'd have a cigar in one hand, a cigarette in the other hand, and he'd be talking about dogs till 2 or 3 o'clock in the freaking morning, you know. And he was one that hammered it home a lot about just having mentally sound, structurally sound kind of dogs. And he actually talked a lot about some things that I think if the guy was around now, he'd be sitting there and say, "Hey, I told you so. I told you that shit was going to happen. If you guys didn't pay more attention to like the working abilities and the soundness of these dogs, you know," because he used to rant and rave about a lot of the extremities and, you know, the overangulated dogs and dogs that, you know, didn't have good work ethic and things like that. And he's like, you know, because he always used to say, you know, that, dude, the way of the future is with the young people, and you got to get them involved in the training and the training programs and get them involved in that, or they're not going to stick around and just want to go to a dog show. And I think he was right. I think there was a lot to what he said is true.
Sure.
And it's gone from just a short period of time that I shouldn't say short period of time. Sometimes I think it's gone by so fast. I think it's a short period, but in, you know, by the time I'd gotten into it and going hot and heavy in the late 80s, early 90s, it would take like 25 dogs for a major. Well, hell, they're already saying, Jesus, back in the old days, it was taking 50 and 60 males for a major. And hell, there's places now in this country where it takes 4 for a major, and a bunch of other places where it's only 5, you know, and in some places 7, 8, you know, and it's like, well, I mean, you know, it's bad. It's just like it fell off a cliff. And, you know, there's a lot of folks from that generation of, you know, the Fords and Miglior and Ranky and all that whole crew. And I guess they probably started in like the late 50s and went on through you know, they were hitting it hot and heavy in the late 60s through the 70s and the 80s. Well, shit, they all aged out, you know, and most of them are dead. And the rest of them they're certainly not breeding dogs anymore. So you can certainly see how a lot of that, and I know you had given me a list of questions and whatnot, and some of that stuff was back further down the line where we're talking about dog shows, but you know, as long as we're talking about the different people, that was just one of the things when you were asking me, you know, what stuck out with some of the things that those handlers were saying back then and some of your mentors, that's one that definitely has turned out to be true. But I was lucky because I kind of got into it, and maybe lucky is not the word. It was just the way things went down was, you know, I kind of got into it right when several guys were getting ready to retire. So, I mean, I picked up a lot of dogs from those folks.
Sure. Yeah.
And at that time, there was so much participation. You could go to specialty shows and hell, there wasn't nothing to pick up a half a dozen dogs ringside at that dog show. I mean, you might go there lined up showing 4 or 5, right? And then by the time you were done, you had one in damn near every class, you know, because somebody would ask you to take it in and show it. Now you'll enter 5 and you're lucky if you show 3 by the time you get there, you know?
Right. Yeah. So let's switch over a little bit to the handling side of things. How do you really define what you consider a handler job and the responsibilities that come along with that?
Well, I think basically, you know, your first obligation has to be to those dogs, and that whole dynamic has changed over the years as well. I mean, when I was going to the most amount of specialties, like when I was younger and could show, like when I had the most amount of dogs in my string of dogs to show, my client base was the largest, I was probably doing like 50 specialty shows, maybe I mean at least that many, because I'd normally go to, you know, 6 to 8 futurities every year. And I mean, year after year, when I put my spreadsheet together to put those fraternities together, I mean, I was responsible for normally around 150 animals, you know, and at a lot of those shows, the owners would bring their dogs. So it's not like you were running around carrying a lot of dogs. And now, I mean, mostly I would take probably 6 dogs with me to the all breed dog shows and maybe show 4 or 5 of them. I did a lot of years traveling where I just did it by myself, you know, so it was, you know, I'd normally just show class dogs and get out of there. I didn't even worry about showing the breed and going to groups and whatnot. I went to a lot of shows that I could even drive back and forth to my house, you know, and I'd get done, I'd head back and I'd work on other things, you know, but I think the main thing as far as that goes for your obligations as a handler or whatnot is to, you know how to take care of your animals and kind of the things that you do need to reflect upon your reputation for the sport. And you want to, you know, you're representing German Shepherds, you're representing dog shows, you're representing the whole profession. So you just want to, you know, be cognizant of good sportsmanship, make sure you take care of your dogs and, you know, present them animals well and try to do that on that side of things. And then you have you know, obviously an obligation to your clients. I mean, if they're paying you, I always thought that was almost like a client attorney relationship, you know. I mean, what went on between you and your clients with their dogs, that's their business, right, so to speak. And I mean, they've got their you know, they have their right to want to have those dogs represented. I mean, if they're paying you to represent those dogs, and then that also kind of gets into the sort of the dichotomy of you're also there representing that breed, you know. So you as a handler, I mean, you need to be cognizant of the fact that, I mean, you don't necessarily, and as I go on about this, I mean, you have to constantly be looking in the mirror at things too, right? You know, because it's when you're making a living off those dogs and you're doing that as a handler, it's easy to put the, you know, bringing home the paycheck and feeding your family, so to speak, to like handling this dog or that dog or taking it into the ring. But I mean, you really want to try to do the best that you can to, you know, promote animals that you feel are worthy of being promoted. And you don't necessarily need to be out there trying to promote the shit out of a dog that you know is going to be a detriment to the breed and things like that. I mean, it gets to be you know, I mean, everybody's got to make choices on some of those things. And, you know, I think you get put in a position sometimes as a handler where you're doing things because somebody contracted you to do things, and you don't necessarily know if it's the best thing to do for the overall, you know, betterment of the breed, so to speak. And I do think if you're making a living off of this breed, you know, and you're involved in it that much, I mean, you got to sit back and take a look and think to yourself, I think it's important that we, you know, try to do it some justice. That makes sense to you?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So while we're still on the subject of handling, are there any like specific skills that you feel are really important when it comes to showing these dogs, like especially, you know, at these bigger shows, you know, where there's a lot of people watching, and, you know, with the live streaming and the, you know, televised shows now. I mean, is there any skills that you think to really showcase the dogs that people should focus on if they're going to be handling dogs?
I always tell the junior handlers when I get a chance to talk to them, I think the most important thing that they could do as far as their ability to handle dogs is get to understand the fundamentals of the dog's anatomy. You know, learn the standard as best they can, you know, learn learn about the dogs that they're in charge of, you know, and so, you know, so that, I mean, my job as a handler is like, if you come up to ringside, I need to be able to look at that dog in a few steps and evaluate it in my mind and know what's right and what's wrong about it. And then when I walk into the ring, I should be able to look at the 10 or 12 dogs in there and be able to, after they walk around a little bit, have an idea of what's right and what's wrong about all those animals, and then be able to present my animal in its best light. I need to know what's right with it and what's wrong with it, and then try to accentuate the good and cover up the bad. I mean, that's my job, is to try to sell that animal to the person that's out in the middle of the ring pointing at it, right? And then I need to make an evaluation of the the temperament and the attitude. And like if I'm at specialty shows, I need to get a feel of like how much double handling do I want in the beginning, right? Because I gotta have a feel for that judge. I mean, is he gonna walk the shit out of us like 6 or 7 times, or is he gonna make up his mind in 3 laps, right? And so I gotta have an understanding. Is my dog a 3-lap dog or a 20-lap dog? Maybe I need to. There's been dogs I've handled in the past when I could run. Now I use a bicycle or a mini bike, right? I would take and shit, I might have to run those dogs down a mile before I put them in the ring, because I only got 6 laps to make them look good, So it's like, how much piss and vinegar do you take out of them, so that by the time that guy's really starting to make his decisions, when he's comparing the, say he's got the 2 or 3 in the front, well, I want my 2 or 3 last laps to be that dog's strongest laps. When that guy's getting ready to really make up his mind, that's when I want my dogs to look its best. I don't want it looking its best, not 6 laps before that. You know what I mean? Or it's like, shit. I mean, I've made the mistake a few times too. It's like, hell, I wish I'd have had 2 more laps. I'd have got that son of a gun really looking good. You know what I mean? Yep. So I think that's getting back to, you need to know the standard of those animals, and having have a little bit of I shouldn't say a little bit. I think the more understanding you have of the anatomy of that dog, because that's what's going to tell you how fast you want to move the dog, how much tension you want on the dog. I mean, it's like you got the hind quarter, the ligamentation, the middle piece in the front, so how much torque am I going to have on that lead, and at what angle am I going to put it, and where do I want the how much energy do I want coming out of that animal at what part of the show, to try to get that right. So that's the important stuff. And your dog has to be, you want it to be in as physically good a condition and mental condition as it can be when it gets to that dog show.
Absolutely.
And have it, have it groomed, you don't want the tufts of hair falling out all over, and then all of a sudden at 10 o'clock in the morning you're blowing hair all over, and it's like you got to go in the ring at 10:35, and this is kind of better if you can have them ready a few days before. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So do you train and show differently when you're deciding if you're doing a specialty show or an all breed show? Do you prepare those dogs differently for those shows, or do you just kind of select a different string for each venue?
Well, nowadays a lot of the specialties that we're doing, because we're not going to quite as many as what we did back like 20 years ago, when you had then you had a set of dogs that you would show mostly just at the specialties, and dogs were mostly at the all breed dog shows, right? And a lot of those dogs at the specialties and the futurities, they were getting geared for clients to go to the national, right? So then you were basically, you had to strategize throughout the year with that animal what you wanted to do so that it would peak out at the national. So a lot of those animals, even the specials, I mean, some of the, I don't know, I know we've had over like 20, 25 like Grand Victors and Grand Victrixes and stuff, and and a lot of different select dogs, because a lot of times we'd be responsible and have 2, 3, 4 selects on dogs and bitches, just depending on the year and what's going on. And those animals, you gotta pick your shows and do what you need to do for them to, get them finished, and then special them a couple of times. And, some of those animals, I mean, I maybe only showed them 2 or 3 or 4 times in an entire year before they went to those nationals, right? So they were all fresh, right? They didn't, they didn't go to a lot of dog shows, but you spent a lot of time conditioning and having them in really good, really good frame of mind and really want to hit the lead and go. And I think that probably gets us back to another thing of the dog shows. As time has progressed, I think that some of the style of showing the dogs has changed a little bit too. Although they always, I shouldn't say always, because a lot of it would depend on who was judging them. But at those nationals, they would do a lot of gating, and they didn't necessarily have to be out at the end of a 10-foot lead. That's kind of gotten a little bit ridiculous, I think, over the years. But it's like, well, if that's what they're, if that's what wins, I mean, then you wind up as a professional handler or whatnot, and then, or anybody, I mean, if they want to try to win some of those dog shows, and if that's what's impressing some of the judges, that's what you wind up trying to do. But I'm not saying that that's necessarily the best thing for the overall participation in the sport either. It's just, you were kind of asking I guess I got off track a little bit because you were asking the different preparation between the all breed dog shows and the specialty dog shows. So at the all breed dog shows, historically, years ago, I mean, and not that many years ago either, those dogs would have to look fairly reasonable going down and back on a mat, right? You see some of them real hawk wobbling, effed up hindquarters on them that look like they were knitting a sweater or whatever where they're going away. Most of them old timers would say, yeah, I tell you what, you take that dog down, and when you come back, just old Clint Harris would say, you just take him right on outside the ring, because I don't think that this dog is going to be evaluated today, right? And now it's like, it's almost like a free-for-all. Sometimes it's like, Jesus, I would have never thought 25 years ago that dog would have been at an all-breed dog show, And so in that regard, I used to always fill in the specialties with the all breed shows, and I went by myself, so I didn't have a double handler out there. I just try to have those dogs having fun and animated, and you'd have a 5-foot lead, and they could still run out in front of your knees. They didn't have to go 6 feet out in front of you, but as long as they were happy and going forward, and you'd stop them and bait them and stand them and free bait them and do a good down and back and present them well. I mean, they did good. That's why I sometimes wonder when people are saying, well, as an owner handler, that they can't compete those dogs. But there again, I mean, they should be able to if the judge is being fair about it and realizing that that's an owner handler. I mean, should judge the dog. You've got to realize that they're not going to have them things dialed in like I'm going to have them dialed in. Hell, I've been good at that for a pretty long time. I mean, I'm getting paid to do that. You should know that I'm going to have that dog trained a little bit better than the next guy, or not maybe like the next professional handler, but I mean, as far as an owner handler. But so as a judge, I mean, it's like they shouldn't penalize that dog for not necessarily having a perfect performance. But
do you think certain judging styles over the years have promoted going more towards a handler just because of the presentation of the dog, or seems to be, a hot topic here recently?
I think even back when there was, 100 dogs being shown all the time at the dog shows, even the people that showed their own dogs, when they got a real nice one and they thought that it was worth sticking the money into it and promoting it, they'd hire a professional handler to show it, I mean, but if they make it where it's I hesitate to say like a performance event, right? Because I mean, to me, it's like a dog can be performing when it's like next to the handler too, right? If it's sound-minded and it's energetic and it's got some, it's got some energy, and you can tell it's got a good temperament and a little bit of work ethic, right? I mean, some people conflate the two things of like, it's not, if a dog suffers from separation anxiety and you have its owner on the outside of the ring and they hand it off to a stranger, I mean, it's gonna go, chances are, especially if you practice a little bit like that, I mean, it's sometimes it's harder to take a dog that's not like, if it's got some good drives and it's got a good work ethic, it's not that difficult to have them perform and go, if they're lazy and a little bit sluggish and they're real sound minded, I mean, if they're real open, but yet they're just like a kind of easy going, sometimes the owners, if they're taking them like for too much of a walk in the park all the time, they can have those dogs looking a little dull. Right. So then when you hand that dog, so I mean, it's a dog show and people like to see him perform. So that kind of lends itself to wanting to put that dog with a professional handler. Right. But I mean, at most of those shows years ago, I mean, hell, if you go back and look at national videos from 25, 30 years ago, those dogs weren't out at an end of a 12-foot lead. They were maybe out at the end of a 6 or 7 foot lead at the most, or going, and they were still, they were still hitting it and going, right? But now it's kind of become, the fad over the last, I don't know, 25 years. I mean, it just steadily had gotten that way. It's like, shit, I don't even know how you would think that there's much dog handling involved in that when you got it out at the end of like 10, 12 foot of lead, and as soon as it takes a wrong step or a wrong turn, and all of a sudden the lead is slack and the dog's going here, and it's just like, fuck it, whoops, excuse me. It's like, I didn't mean to curse like that, excuse me. It's like the handler's going as fast as it can and its legs are flying around, and it's like, I don't know, it's almost like I could get my long-legged neighbor to do that, but so it's all relative, I guess, to what it is. But so I do think some of the judging style has it's made it so it's a kind of a professional's deal, but I think it kind of always has been. But a good owner handler, should be, they're able to present their own dogs and do well. But there's just, I mean, look at the age of the people that we have involved in these dogs right now. I mean, look at what the national specialty looks like the last half a dozen years. And it's like the stands are empty, what is the average age? 70 years old, you think? They're telling me like, oh, you're just a puppy. It's like, Jesus, I'm going to be almost 60 years old. I think that you might be just, it's like, we got a few young folks coming along, but I think we need a bunch more of them. And there's not a lot of people that are in their late 20s to 50 years old with like young families. I mean, they're not participating in the sport like they did 30 years ago, like where it was more of a family type sport. And I think that's what we kind of need to, if we want to keep this thing rolling and not have it continue to decline. And that's what we need to focus on, is trying to get more, get a more versatile dog that's, appeals to a wider range of people and get them involved in the dog shows.
Absolutely. So we opened it up for people to submit questions. So let's slide one in here real quick while we're on the topic of shows. The loose lead temperament test. Where and how did that temperament test come along, and like what the time frame, or do you know any specifics on that, or what really brought that on to the specialty shows?
I think that came about before I was going to the dog shows. Like my first dog shows, or at least from what I can remember, I mean, the first show I went to was in 1981. And then I only went to like, I don't know, 25, 30 of them a year or so like that for the first few years. And then I suppose by 85, 86, and 87, I was going to 75 shows a year. And then after that, probably up over 100. But it's my understanding that they started that maybe in like the mid to late 70s. And I was talking to Jim Moses about that, and he was telling me that it was Bob Penny, who was a handler. I believe Bob bred a few dogs as well, but he worked with a group of people in California, and he had a pretty successful obedience training business too. I mean, I remember that from talking to Bob, because he did a lot of obedience training, had a lot of clients, and I think he was on the I don't know if he was on the board of the Shepherd Club, but anyways, he was in charge of some stuff, and that the temperaments, I think at that time, were getting so bad that they decided, hey, we got to do something to try to weed some of these dogs out of the competition, right? So they devised that loose lead temperament test. And then Jim was telling me a story, and I think he told me right shortly after that was they started that it was John Seiler. I think that was, I know Seiler was his last name, and he was I'm sure he was an old Shepherd guy. When I remember him, he was a AKC rep, but he was a judge before that. And then Jim was telling me there was a class one time about 20 or 25 open dogs, right? And with Mr. Seiler's temperament test, he said there was 6 left, right? He said they were just, he'd be like walking at them like that. And son of a guns were, they were darting around, and John was like, well, it ain't gonna be you today, my friend, and out you go. So they came about that, and I'm sure that it helped. It didn't hurt, but sometimes I think that, like I know particularly at some of the Albrecht shows, I don't even know that a lot of those Albrecht judges are all that comfortable doing it. And I wind up telling them, I'm not even sure that it makes that much sense. I mean, if you're a reasonable dog person, it seems like you can get a fairly good idea of what that animal's looking like once it comes in the ring, especially if you don't start running them wide open. I mean, if you take a couple of slow laps around that ring, I mean, you start to see those ones that are not comfortable in their own skin, and I mean, you're gonna bring them up in front of you when you do that individual examination on them. And I mean, you're gonna stand there and you're gonna walk that dog forward, and then you're gonna go over it. I mean, you should be able to be getting a pretty good understanding of the temperament. That's not really even a fair way to say that. You're just going to get a glimpse into that dog for like a 2 or 3 minute period on that day, right? And then you're going to have that dog go down and back, you're going to look at it, you're going to see it. But I mean, you can still see if it's confident or not. And I mean, the standard is very explicit about that dog should, exude confidence in all the situations. And I mean, if it's nervous and anxious and looking around like, it wants to try to find a hole to crawl in, well, obviously that ain't what they're looking for, so it probably, say, look, nice dog and all that stuff, but maybe after it gets a little more exposure and a little more work at the next dog show, it can do better, but it doesn't necessarily have to win that dog show. And I don't know, because I mean, I've seen sound dogs go out there and you drop the lead on them and somebody walks towards them and the handler takes a step back and the double handler moves over here, and then the dog moves and it throws its head, and then the judge reaches out and the dog, flicks its head because it didn't see the hand coming, and right away he's labeled a spook, and then the spook goes out there and it's so fixated on the because of the separation anxiety that it won't take the owner out of its sight. That one just stands there like a rock, and the judge goes over it, and that one wins the dog show. You know what I mean? So you got to think about that with a little common sense. And, and it's not that difficult. I shouldn't say not that difficult, because sometimes if a dog, feels pressure for whatever reason, that's why I don't like that temperament test on puppies either. I mean, in this day and age, when you got that the older clientele, and there's hardly any breeders, so a lot of them have to hang on to several dogs, right? And then they take these puppies to the dog show, and then they hand them off to a stranger that's going to handle them, and then they're on the outside. They already got that puppy all worked up, and then they want to have the jet. Then they want to call it out to the middle of the ring and then have the judge like stalk it on a loose lead. Well, I mean, that's not a very good way to start that puppy off from the standpoint of, you know, how it feels about dog shows for the rest of its life. You know, it's like, that's why I think it's good for the owner handlers sometimes, and the owners, just take that puppy in yourself, you know, let it have fun, let it go around. Don't make a big deal out of showing its teeth and checking its testicles. Just go around, pat it up, play with it, let it have a good time, and let it think that the dog shows are fun. You know, why put undue, you know, and it shouldn't necessarily be pressure, but if you have certain things go wrong or not go the right way, you can take a sound dog and then all of a sudden have it acting goofy, right? And then there's going to be a whole bunch of people that say, well, if that dog was sound, it wouldn't act goofy. It's like, well, I've worked on a lot of dogs over the years, right? I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And I'm telling you, it ain't always so easy, and it ain't always so black and white, you know. And I've had European show dogs, and I've had European working line dogs, and I've had a lot of American show line dogs, and I've had a bunch of crosses, right? And it's a mixed bag with a lot of those dogs. And I've seen dogs with super strong working line pedigrees that if they don't get, you know, a lot of times if they're not socialized at all, and they're not, you know, opened up to the environment, and then you put them in the wrong situations, I mean, if they got a bit of a suspicion level to them or something, I mean, it's you got to spend time with the youngsters and try to open up the minds on them, right? And show them the environment and have them feel good about the dog shows and have them feel good about the surroundings, and then you know, don't put pressure on the youngsters.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, you know,
We're firm believers on that, you know, because then they associate that issue with the dog show, and then you've got to fix it at the dog show. And it's, you know, if they've got doubts about that, then you're just up against the wall right from the get-go, it seems like. So while
I
we're
mean,
still
I
talking
hate
about the
that
young
when I
dogs.
see owners take. Let me just say one other thing. I just
Mhm.
hate it with, like, when I see owners sometimes with the dogs that have hardly been to any shows, or they haven't hardly been anywhere. I mean, they don't need to just go to dog shows. They just need to get out and see the world, right? So they've not seen anything, and they're well past the age where they should have had just tons of time spent on them. You know, they'd be like 5, 6 months old, hardly ever been on a leash, hardly ever been anywhere. Then they take them somewhere, and then they just let one stranger after the other go up and grab onto their heads and grab a hold of them. And like, by the time that dog sees about the fourth person walking towards it just naturally wants to go the other way. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But then after that dog is then when he gets to about, you know, 1.5 or something like that, or say, oh, hey, take this dog now and try to fix him, you know, make him so he's a show dog, you know. And it's like, okay, you know, don't make it easy, right? I think
Yeah,
there's a lot of things that could be done with these youngsters that could, you know, make them a lot more successful as they get older.
for sure.
Make
So, like,
everybody, you know.
yeah, how early on do you start noticing characteristics in an animal that you think could be a really, you know, strong show potential or campaign potential animal, and what characteristics like really jump out that really, you know, make you gravitate toward thinking about a long-term career for that animal?
Well, I mean, man, you start looking at that stuff when they're little, you know. I mean, when they're, you know, I mean, you can kind of get a little bit of an idea just as they're walking along, but I mean, they do change a lot. I mean, Lord knows I would be the last person probably to sit there and say, well, I can always pick them out, when they're just little bitty babies, and I know which one's going to be the superstar and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I got an idea who's got potential, and I like to bring them along. And sometimes you get lucky, and sometimes maybe not so lucky, right? But I mean, a lot of really good dogs. I mean, you can see when they're babies, and then hell, if they keep going along, and I mean, if they're looking, real nice at 8, 10, 12 weeks, and 14, 15 weeks, and they're looking good, I mean, you're on the right track, and you want to do the right things with that dog so you can open it up and get it exposure and have it liking life, loving life. I mean, that makes a good show dog when it it's got all the parts and pieces, and if you've got the some of the details on them, that you got the good nice coat and pigment and ears and straight legs and good feet, and then you got the and then when the anatomy is, when you basically got the, you got a nice long croup and a good working hind quarter and a firm middle piece and strong withers and good shoulders on that animal, and then you got all the rest of that stuff. I mean, you're going in the right direction there. And you're never going to find the perfect ones, but I mean, if you can, get the promising ones as youngsters, and then grow them up and get them in the, there used to be a lot more show homes that you could get them in, where the people would do a good job with those youngsters and have that dog have a good life. I mean, there's still some participation in that regard, but nothing the way it was 30 years ago. That's for sure.
Gotcha.
So I mean, as far as what you're talking about, it's like, I mean, how good do you know that they're going to be? I mean, to me, it's like that's still something that just develops over time. And I mean, I've seen dogs change a fair amount from the standpoint of just how good you did that, or how, I shouldn't say how good, but how successful that you were thinking that they were going to be able to be as far as show dogs. And then it depends, I mean, what you're talking about too. If you're talking about showing them at 6-8 specialty shows and then a national over the course of the year, or if you're talking about showing them all the time, like if you're doing them all breed dog campaigns, that's a whole different deal too, from the standpoint of, it's just a lot of shows, and it's a much more fatiguing type of thing. I mean, that's what's difficult sometimes, to show those type of dogs at your national specialties, because historically on those dogs that we won those nationals with, I mean, they might have only been shown 15 times in their entire lives, maybe 25 times, but I mean, not a lot. Then some of these dogs that are, Moses would be able to tell you a hell of a lot more about that than I would be, just because of the fact that, I mean, I don't know how he did it, but I mean, he won he had those top herding dogs like 18 out of 20 times in a 20-year period of time, something like that, probably more, plus not just those 20 years. Well, those dogs are shown, hell, I mean, when the last one, when I did last year's national, I mean, we went to like 180 dog shows last year, and then so that was 180 breeds, right, that she won. So then you go in a group ring 180 times. So that's 360 times in the ring. And then on top of that, is you won like 125 groups. So then you're going in the best in show ring 120 or another 125 times. So you're at 360, 460, 485 times in the ring, and it's like, that's gotta get, I mean, if you're not really being careful with those animals, I mean, you ain't going to be having them looking all that swift at the end of that. I mean, they're not going to be, so it takes a special kind of animal to be able to do that, and then be able to go to those nationals and then compete at that level with all those fresh young dogs. That's why I think sometimes too, it's like back when I was talking about early on when I won that national in 1992, I mean, hell, that was that was with a bitch that still needed a major to finish, right? And I was careful with her. I don't think she was shown 6 times. And you know, I mean, she's out there running like a banshee, and Jim was showing Mystique, and I think it was, I don't know if that was in Mystique's 2nd or 3rd year. Well, that bitch had been shown like a ton of times, you know. And Mystique was 2nd. I actually thought she was probably going to win for sure that dog show. I was more surprised than anyone that we won that. But I mean, it's just the difference of you know, that type of showing. So
yeah. So when you're campaigning a dog, you know, at that many shows, you know, throughout the year, like how much time really do you have to focus on conditioning to keep an animal, you know, mentally and physically in shape to handle that kind of schedule? And then, you know, just like how many weekends on the road, you know, how many weekends do you really plan on showing an animal if you're going to campaign them to try to be one of the top herding dogs?
well, you almost have to be gone that every week just because that stuff is so competitive. And now there's so many dog shows going on. I mean, it's like I said, I mean, I was at 180 dog shows with her last year. And I mean, you got to take your bike along, and you got to exercise them and keep them out and do whatever you can do. I mean, at that type of thing, I mean, your world's kind of got to revolve around that dog. That's just the only way that'll work, because you got too much time traveling between dog shows and too much time there. So you got to be doing stuff with that dog every day. So, but anyways, but that, you know, for like normal showing and people, excuse me. Hey Maria, could you get another one? I think then it's more about keeping the dog toned up and fit, right? And it depends on what kind of shows you're wanting to go to. But you know, I think like, you know, daily exercise is important for those animals, and sometimes more so than that, it's just I think people need to play more with their dogs. You know, just have them out and you know, trying to get them to, you know, kind of feel the joy a little bit, you know, and feel happy to be alive, and then have them in condition. And then because you can make up for like some deficiencies in anatomy and whatnot, you can make up for that with a little bit of conditioning and presentation, you know. Thank you. And that's the other thing when it comes to conditioning those dogs. I mean, you got to have an understanding where that dog excels and where its shortcomings are, and see if there's any way that you can physically condition those animals to try to get a little more out of them. And I think that's probably more to do with like some of the angulation and ligamentation type stuff. And then you know, it's like as a handler too, it's like, well, at what speed and at what level of animation and what type of tension and angle you're putting on that lead can you make that dog flow at its best, right? So sometimes it's like with different dogs, it's like, well, you know, I think it's helpful if you have a good area to give them dogs some good exercise and you know, just keep them fit and toned up, and play with them so that they're happy. Absolutely. And that, I mean, that any owner handler should be able to do that kind of stuff with those dogs, I would think. And especially if they have if they're a couple, you know, so one of them, you know, if it's two partners going, you know, and one can play with the dog and the other one can run it around, you know. I mean, they don't do that much gating anymore, where you got to go for, it's not like you're going to go out there on a 90-degree day and they're going to take you 15 laps. It's just not going to happen. But especially at some of the all breed dog shows, I mean, that's a 2-lap deal.
So with a lot of these dogs that are being campaigned, you know, everything, you know, everything's so expensive to do anymore, you know, the travel, the hotels, all of that. A lot of these top dogs have pretty much have a team put together. How do you try to to find the right team to where everyone's going to get along and maintain that relationship amongst everyone. And just how do you guys really focus on getting the right people involved to help support these dogs?
Well, that just depends on the dogs and who's breeding them and who has interest in them, and you just have to get people that, in that regard, that love the breed and want to promote the breed, especially if you're talking about at some of those all breed dog shows. I mean, you need folks that believe in the sport and want to just back that particular breed, and then you need to have a dog that they all feel is a good representative of the breed. That's why, like, as a handler, like, if you're gonna do one of those types of dogs, it's important that you have one that is good, so when the general public sees them, that they say, hey, look at that shepherd, I love that dog, because it's a very popular breed. So you want to have a good representative of it, sound-minded, sound-legged. I mean, these AKC show dogs now have such a reputation from whether it's professional dog people, pet people, veterinarians, working dog people, or people all over the world. I mean, they think that American show line dogs, now I'm speaking in generalities here, so to speak, right? Because obviously when I say this, I mean, I'm not trying to slam American AKC German Shepherd dogs, right? We all belong to the German Shepherd Dog Club of America. We all go to AKC dog shows. We obviously, I shouldn't say, I mean, I don't know who's all watching this thing, but I mean, we're here and Donna put this thing on from the education standpoint, but I'm telling you, from traveling and going to Germany like a lot of different times to the Seeger show, and going to a lot of working dog events, and going to police dog trials, and going to like SV style confirmation shows, and just hanging around dog people in general. The majority of the public views AKC German Shepherd dogs as I shouldn't say like they're they have a preconceived notion that they're all overangulated, slab-sided, and don't have good temperament, and there's so much of that going around that I think it's important in this day and age that we all try to do whatever we can to try to change the opinion of folks, and if you look at some of the dog shows, I mean, you can understand why they would say that, I mean, I've been to, and it's not just recently. I mean, hell, one example I'm thinking of was I was at a park in St. Louis one time, probably like 30 years ago, and there's a family sitting on a blanket watching the dog show. Then this one dog comes in there, and I mean, it was like super down on its pasterns and way down on its hocks. It had a lower thigh that was about 4 inches too long, and it had a croup that was coming down at about a 50-degree angle, probably, right? And then its ears were flapping, and it's going in the down and back, and it damn near looked like its ass end got tangled up, and the people were like, wow, that dog really looks like it's in pain, And I'm sitting there thinking, it's like, well, maybe it's not in pain and stuff like that, and it's going around, but it's like, you can certainly understand why they said that, because it looked dreadful, and it was like so unsound looking. And I think people have a responsibility to not be bringing, I mean, that happens. It happens in this breed sometimes. I mean, there's so much angulation overall in so many different bloodlines, and there's so much stuff that can happen. And if those dogs get stressed, or they get, something goes on and they go down on the pasterns, I mean, that stuff happens. I mean, I'm not saying that, that the people should be ostracized, or the dogs, or anything else, but I mean, don't take it to the dog show and then walk it all over for the general public to associate the fact that, oh, look at that AKC German Shepherd show dog. Is that what these people think is normal? Because that, by and large, is a lot of the reason that the whole world has the perception that we're a bunch of lunatics, and that we're doing a disservice to this breed. And in a lot of ways, they're right. So somehow or another, I mean, I think between the handlers and the breeders and the judges, because the more that those dogs constantly get put up that way, I mean, if you're paying me to show your dog, I'm going to pick out which ones that you can take those dogs to, right? And you know, it's just kind of like some of the stuff that goes on in Germany, right? If those dogs are getting too big and things like that, they're like, well, you got a couple of years to change this stuff around, and then we're going to start penalizing the shit out of it, right? And then if all of a sudden, that couple of years is up, and then they start throwing those dogs to the back of the line, it does not take those breeders and those handlers very long, and then that stuff is done away with, you know. Now what they need to do away with is get some straighter top lines and a more normal angle to the croup, and get some stronger ass ends on some of that. And I think that they are aware of that as well, and they're working in that direction. And I think over here we need to have stronger males, stronger animals, you know, a more moderate functional hindquarters on them, and just a more utilitarian type of functional animal, you know. And then I do think that you'll get more people that will want to participate with these dogs. Because if you go around to these all breed dog shows and start talking to all kinds of different people from different breeds, and then, I mean, their concept of what German Shepherd people want is skewed, you know, because I just don't know that many real good dog people that want dysfunctional animals. I mean, this is supposed to be a utilitarian working type of animal, right? I mean, that can go like all day long and whatnot. I mean, I just can't really imagine some of the over-angulated, loose ligamentated, sloppy dogs competing in one of those AD tests that you would have to do on the SV side of things in order to wind up getting those dogs their coring done on them, because that's like a 12-mile endurance run, right? I mean, some of those dogs, it's like, Jesus, I mean, you'd have a long ways to get them things ready to go on a 12-mile run. Sure. And mind you, I mean, they break them after 5 miles and they break them after 9 miles, but it's still, I mean, you go road working some of your dogs for 9 miles or 12 miles and they ain't going to look real swift. And some of those, and I get it, right? I mean, that some of that extreme side gait, I mean, it does, it looks good 2-3 laps around sometimes. And I mean, there's a difference. I mean, and I get it. Like, I've been to a ton of those education seminars, and some of the people have said side gait is the only thing that matters. You don't have to pay attention to the heads, and you don't have to pay attention to the feet, and you don't have to pay attention to coming and going. Side gait's all we care about. And I'm like, you know, it's like, and it's like, then their perception of what good side gait is skewed too, because somewhere along the line, it's like, do you mean like side gait for 3 laps around a 50-foot ring, or do you mean side gait after that dog is gone for like 6 or 8 miles, right? If that dog is going like all day long, I mean, some of those dogs that you know, and they're dogs I've shown in the past too. I mean, they're loose ligamentated, big old striders, and they get them animated and, you know, going around the ring to beat hell and stuff like that. And I can make them look really good for a while. But I mean, if it was a 90-degree day and you work the shit out of them, you probably want to, you know, instead of your, your helpers coming out there with a bucket of water, it's like, hey, bring the stretcher out here. Let's take this dog back to the truck. He's done, you know, because they're not going to last.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from my experience of doing, I got these like little mini bikes, you know, and like all the mileage on them and stuff. There's about a time and a half around the equator on those that I've exercised and ran those dogs. And believe me, more of a moderately angulated, balanced dog with a good strong back and good muscle, you know, good ligamentation is going to outlast a really extended, overreaching, angulated, loose ligamentated dog every time. Yeah. If you're going to take them, you know, there gets to be a certain point where the length of the stride is gonna, I mean, it's a ground covering gait, right? Least amount of steps for, for most amount of ground and all that stuff. But once you get to the point where the muscular expenditure exceeds its ability, to maintain that gait over time, it starts to be a detriment, right? So, I mean, you can have that outreaching gait, which is, that's what we want. We want smooth, easy movers, no doubt about it. I mean, and it is that's all over the standard, but it's for a working type of animal. Doesn't say that we're supposed to get the most extreme gait like that for 3 laps at a dog show.
So what do you guys do? What are your
All right,
common practices on conditioning those dogs, so that to keep them in shape and, to have them prepared for the different kinds of shows? Like what are some of your common practices that you guys really focus on, and like how specific for each animal do you really have to focus on, or is it kind of just an umbrella, like a general exercise program that you guys try to keep them on?
Oh, I mean, it's tailored to the different dogs. I mean, and it's different with the mentality of them and how they like it. I mean, we do a lot of just road work type stuff, right? I mean, when I say road work, I've got like a 17-acre field out behind my house that one side of it is up a hill. I mean, and it's a rectangular shape. So the back side of it's probably, 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet. Then it comes around a corner and goes down, and then so it's 0.8 of a mile around that. Like I said, I've got golf carts and mini bikes and stuff like that, and then we try to keep when we're running dogs and things like that, we'll keep a couple of them out there, so they're looking at something, and you try to make it fun for them when they're going out and do it. You don't want them to, it's like, oh my God, he's got the leash and he's got that mini bike. Jesus, guys, don't let him put that leash over my neck. I don't want to go out and run like this. I mean, you want to make it so it's a good time of their day, right? You want to say, hey, let's go, and it's like they want to get them out and get them to enjoy running and just going out and performing. And then you have your person that's going to be your double handler part of the time, have them go hide and ring their double handling thing and let the dogs go so they run, chase them and find them, so that you're making a big game out of that type of stuff. If they've got some decent ball drive, take them outside, gate them a little bit, then play ball with them. Take them out and just let them have fun. Then get them so they enjoy it.
How early on do you guys really start focusing on conditioning to get one ready?
Well, the condition of a puppy is going to be different than the condition of adult, right? I mean, so then, we're not taking them puppies out and pounding on them and gating the daylights out of them and stuff like that. I mean, but those guys you take out and you just play with them, and I think that's where a lot of people fall short with these dogs, is they don't spend enough time playing with them when they're young and take them out individually. So they'll break a little bit of that bond with other dogs. I mean, get them so they're more focused on their people, and then try to, the easiest way that I found to like leash break puppies is I put a fur saver on them with a leash and a couple of snaps dragging on the ground, so there's like a little tension, and then I run next to them like with a little food and stuff like that, and then I just do a little, once they hit their stride, when they're gating good and the carriage is right and they're feeling good, then I like to mark it with like a clicker or something like that, and then feed them a bunch, like release them and feed them and praise the shit out of them, so then they're going along, and so now they're gating with that, and then they get used to that leash and a little bit of tension, and it's different than me walking behind them, or where the dog's pulling and then got loose leash, then tight lead, and then this and that, and then they're giving them like little automatic corrections. I mean, you can take those little 7-8-week-old puppies and put a wide collar on them and a couple of, like maybe I don't even know what the heck it would weigh, a pound or something, and a couple of brass snaps on the end of a lead, have them pull into that a little bit, and then just praise the shit out of them for pulling for little short periods, and then play with them and try to build a little prey drive in them and a little ball drive and a little food drive, and just try to do stuff to have them happy and try to build a little bit of a human relationship with them, and then they'll be a lot better suited for a show ring when they get older. So
What kind of surface? What kind of
as
surface?
they get older, I mean, you can. We try to do mostly on grass.
Grass.
Sometimes when you're on the road with those dogs, it's a little difficult, and you gotta make a couple concessions, but then you're not gonna run them on blacktop for as long, but you can take them a little bit on it just to give them a little exercise. But there's normally places you can go where you can find that there's some grass where you can run those dogs on. I don't think you should be running them on. I don't think you need to be running them a lot on cement and tar, things like that. Especially you got to be careful in the heat and in the sun. I mean, it's always best to do it when they're cool. And I don't take them out and work them when they're going to get hot. If it is hot and I'm trying to condition them that way to get them used to the heat, I just do it a little bit, and then I take them and I hose them off, make them feel good, and then play with them so they don't resent that stuff. I mean, I had a guy just not too long ago, and if you're listening, you'll know what I'm talking about. I won't say any names because he's how can I get my dog to go more? He just doesn't seem to want to go in the ring and this and that and the other thing. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? And he's telling me he's road working them and all this stuff. It's like, how are you road working them? He's like, well, I'm running them next to the golf cart and this and that. I said, well, why don't you send me a video so I can see what you're doing? And he sends me his video, and I'm watching his dog. And he's got like this collar hanging down with this big snap on it. And about every third step that dog took, that snap would hit that dog in the underjaw like that. And he'd go 4 steps, that it hit him in the underjaw. You could just see the dog's eyes wince because he knew he was going to get. It's like, I call him, it's like, have you watched that tape? I mean, how would you think that dog is going to enjoy going out and getting hit in the head with a snap like that, like over and over and over again, So it's just like, some of that's going to be like little common sense can go a long way sometimes.
Sure. So let's talk about shows here a little bit before we wrap up. So as long as you've been attending the dog shows, what major changes have you seen over time when it comes to different styles of handling? And obviously a big thing right now is the declining entries. How have you seen that come into play? And are there any ideas of what we can start getting in the right direction to change that, to get those entries back up?
Well, I think that a lot of that stuff has got to do with trying to get more people that are, I mean, we talked a little bit about that already, right? And I think it's important from the standpoint of first of all, we don't have a lot of breeders left anymore. And the ones that are, I mean, if you can encourage those people to go to the local dog club, and then that's another problem because a lot of the local dog clubs really don't offer so much, I don't think, for the new person coming in. I mean, they don't have a lot of educational stuff going on that gives them a reason to come back. And then a lot of those dog clubs don't offer obedience anymore. So then you've got just obedience clubs that are going on that don't have any confirmation stuff going on. So then you've got, I mean, sometimes, if those people buy dogs and they want to go to the obedience club, but then they don't, I mean, if they don't have very solid nerves and if the dogs are too overangulated and then they get there and the people laugh at them because they think their dogs, it's like, Jesus, you better take your dog to the vet. Something's wrong with him. He's got all this. Did you look at his ass end? He must be dysplastic, it's like, I think, it kind of, from a breeding standpoint of view, but you got to get those people hooked somehow. And normally people go to obedience first at the dog club, and then they see the confirmation shows going on, and you can talk them into attending a match or something. and they go and get a couple of ribbons, and then they get a little bit excited, and then the people that are there at the club just try to keep promoting that, just promoting the dog shows and encouraging them and try to get them to go and have some fun. And I think it's going to kind of, let's just start with the basics. I mean, I don't know hardly anybody that wound up coming to dog shows just right off the bat. It's like, you ask me, well, how'd you get going to dog shows? It's like, well, I just kind of wound up, first I wanted a dog, and then I wanted to learn about the dog, and then I went to obedience with the dog, and then I seen the dog shows, Then I'm a competitive person. I enjoyed that. And for like myself, well, then I seen that was an opportunity to be able to participate in dogs full time. If I was going to wind up redoing it, if I was going to change things, I would participate more in more of a sport dog type training and do more with working line dogs, because I really enjoy those kind of dogs, and I have a lot of fun when I go to the dog club. We up here in town at the kennel, we started like a USA IPO club. Oh shit, back in about 07, and that thing still flourishes and still goes pretty good. But the guy that kind of took over as the training director, he lives about 75 miles from me, and the club meets like 60 miles away. So I don't get that many opportunities to go down there. But I think in and those people that are good dog trainers, shit, if they're pros at it, they do well. And not necessarily for the sport dog people that are training like for the sports, but I mean just people that want to like train family dogs and have, say like if somebody had a German Shepherd and they wanted some real good obedience put on it, and then put it in a home as like a personal protection type dog. Shit, I mean, you can take dogs like that and charge $125 a day for the training, and then you can sell them for a decent amount of money to start with too, and then people that train them get good money for training them, and then some of those ones when they sell them, I mean, shit, they and people think that they're spending a fortune, paying somebody $25 a day to take a dog down to the mall or something and walk it back and forth for 4 hours so it doesn't spook from a grocery cart or something like that. And it's like, I mean, I think we got to get dogs that are more suitable to the general public and get them so that they want it. Because I guarantee you nowadays, like if somebody called me up and they start talking to me about wanting to buy a German Shepherd dog, that they have a preconceived idea right off the get-go that the first thing, they know what they don't want, and they don't want an American bred show dog. That's almost an automatic. So then I have to go through the whole spiel about trying to explain to them that, first of all, when they make comments like that, they're not really informed very well, because to say an AKC show dog, that runs the gamut just in itself. I mean, there's some absolutely fantastic, wonderful dogs that you could fit into that category. Some of the best dogs that there's ever been fit into that category. But the problem is that there have been so many examples put out there in front of the general public that they do have that preconceived idea. I think you can ask anybody that's involved in multiple aspects of German Shepherds, and they're going to tell you that. I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to say, oh, Kent's full of shit, he don't know what he's talking about. But I mean, I hang around with a lot. I've tried to make friends with people from many different aspects of the dog community, right? And the show dog part of it is only part of it, right? I've got a couple of good friends that I have police dogs, and they train police dogs. And then I got the guy that does the club that we started. There's a good 20 members that participate all the time down there. And when you take, by and large, a lot of the dogs that would come from our dog show community and put them up against a lot of those other kind of dogs, we do not have a very good representation of a dog that can do a lot of work. There's always examples. I mean, and there's some fantastic people that have done a wonderful job trying to prove that's not necessarily so. And I don't want to come across as being too negative about this stuff, you know, but I do get frustrated sometimes when I'm at like some of these national events, you know, and then I see dog after dog, and it's like, Jesus, I hope that's not going on live stream all over the world, because it's certainly not necessarily you know, what we want to try to be promoting, that we're you know, the German Shepherd Dog Club of America, you know, is you know, bottom line is we just got to work hard at getting sounder, better dogs and a more marketable dog to the public, and get them to participate.
For sure. Yeah, I think, you know, you covered a lot of with the soundness, and there's, you know, really pushing the versatility of the breed, you know, and having a very versatile animal. You know, I think that's a good thing that you touched on there for sure. So we'll try to wind things up here. Let's just talk a little bit maybe about the animal rights situation, how it's impacting dog shows, you know, and the local legislations, that kind of thing. Just what are your some things that maybe catch your attention that, you know, we could be aware of and need to keep an eye on.
Well, I'm not as well versed on that whole subject as I should be, right? But I think that, gosh, and if you go to the American Kennel Club, it's like the government relations web page, they try to keep you informed of some of the stuff that's going down. And I know, like in Europe, they've got some really restrictive type of legislation that's been passed. I mean, that was one of the big deals that affected the participation at the Seeger shows lately, was hell, they had legislation passed where in certain, and I think it was up to some of the local municipalities, where, I mean, you had to have a certain, I mean, and most of the people that travel over there have their dogs in dog trailers. But I mean, there was stuff going on where you had to get those dogs out of those trailers every 2 hours. And if they had somebody in the parking lot of a hotel watching that, and if those dogs didn't come out, I mean, they could suspend you from participating in the sport of dogs, right? And they've already banned like the e-collars and the prong collars and stuff. And I mean, you know, those are just tools that people use in training. I mean, and they can be a wonderful asset. And a training collar, an e-collar worked that's used purposefully and not abused. I mean, that's just giving a dog a signal, you know. I mean, you don't sit there and, you know, crank them up and then fry the dog and all that kind of crazy shit. I mean, that stuff doesn't work anyway. But I mean, people that use e-collars, that they're giving a dog a signal when the dog's 100 feet away and things like that. And I mean, it's like all of a sudden it's like, holy schmoly, you got him on remote control, you know. And the same thing with some of those prong collars. And I know you can't have that type of stuff at like AKC dog events and things like that, but shit, I mean, they've outlawed it, you know. And it's like, hell, there was even stuff going on. So like, if you had a trainer coming over here to this country and putting on a seminar, and they had somebody videotape them or using the prong collars or e-collars, they were going to try to go take and ban them from participating in dogs over there. And I heard of that Sheila Goff is she's the director of the government relations department for the AKC. She was telling me last week about a legislation they tried to pass in New Hampshire with those, like, what do they call it, brachiocephalic type breeds, you know, like your pugs and bulldogs and Frenchies and things like that. They tried to get it through the state legislature where they were going to make it an absolute felony to sell or breed dogs from within those breeds, right? And they didn't even realize it was going down until it had kind of gotten a little bit of traction, right? And I think they've got it on hold, but it's like they're trying to, in certain areas, pass legislation that if you have a breed of dog that is known for certain genetic issues, and you had a dog that say that they could prove, maybe like just take DM for example, or something like that. And I'm not saying that there's laws out there like this, but this is the thinking on the animal rights people. So you take that dog and you knowingly breed that, and you breed that to one where that could actually, come up with a genetic defect or something that they could say was a genetic defect, where they would try to hold you up to like felony charges, get you, take away your gun rights, take away your voting rights, find the living shit out of you, and then pull you any type of things you had with your kennel license, right? If you're in an area where you need a kennel license. And then the other thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to sort of like circumvent the Department of Agriculture and give the Department of Justice the authority to go in and do some of the kennel inspections that normally the Department of Agriculture would do. Well, as well as I do, that there ain't going to be animal people that know what's going on. You're going to have a lot of your animal rights folks and things like that they're anti-breeder right from the get-go, that are going to try to pass as much stuff and go after people as much as they can, and just, so I think everybody needs to take a little extra time and see what's going on. And one of the strategies that the animal rights people do use is they go into these smaller communities where you would never even suspect it. They'll go into like a rural community that's got a bunch of farmers on the town board, and there's a few women, from other avenues and whatnot, professionals, and then they'll go in and they'll try to sell some of this legislation to a couple of people that they'll single out on those boards, and then they'll try to get that legislation passed at those local smaller levels without the community even knowing what's going on. And the AKC, the only way that they're able to keep track of that is if somebody realizes it's going on and then informs them. But they do a good job of trying to keep the people informed as best they can, right?
Yeah,
so
but like I said,
there's
I think
a lot of stuff going on where
that's why I think,
just
like you
say,
said,
there's a
everyone
lot
needs
of
to be
stuff
be
going on.
aware, so if any of that comes up, in your area, that just in case the AKC is not aware of it, we can help bring it to light, so it doesn't slide through the cracks, kind of deal, for sure. So
yeah, for sure. No, I think that's important, and I think that's good for the GSDCA to, stay up on that kind of stuff, and work with the AKC, because they spend a lot of money, and then they've got a like a pack that you can donate money to that organization too, just to help, pay for the lobbyists that they have. And at least they're hooked up with a couple of good lobbyists that are work with the Department of Agriculture, and in a couple of, like with the swine community, I don't know if you'd call it the pork producing, lobby and whatnot, which is very powerful and whatnot. And I think that the dog people have kind of got themselves hooked up with a couple of those folks that really keep an eye on stuff. But there's a lot, and there's a lot going on, and it's going on all over. So anyways.
all right, sir. Well, let's wrap this up. It's about 9 o'clock here Eastern time.
Okay.
So I
all right. Well,
really appreciate you jumping on here and sharing your wisdom and some of your views and everything that you've gone through. We truly do appreciate it. And then
now remember,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, now remember, just because I say certain things, that certainly doesn't mean that everybody that participates in the education committee of the German Shepherd Dog Club of America feels the same way. Those are my opinions, and that's the way I think about stuff. And I'm sure there's a few others that think that way, but you asked me for my opinion, and I thought I'd try to give it to you as best I could.
Absolutely. We appreciate that.
Anyways,
for sure.
I appreciate you. I appreciate you having me on and asking me to share those with you.
Absolutely. So for everyone watching the webinar, we thank you for taking the time and joining us. This presentation was free. But the Education Committee would appreciate any donations so we can continue to offer these on a regular basis. So that would obviously help us out and go a long ways. There's a link. It's gsdca.org/product/educational-webinar-donations copy. You can go right on there and donate if you would like, and we would appreciate it. And not only you, Kent, but we would take a second to thank the German Shepherd Dog Club of America's Education Committee, and again, the German Shepherd Dog Club of Northern Ohio for coming up with this idea and letting us take it to the public.
Oh yeah, thank you, Janine, for doing that. That was awesome. I appreciate that, and I hope there's more to come. It's always good to have discussions, and this is the kind of thing that we used to discuss over a few adult beverages after the dog shows, which we don't do enough of anymore. I might say so. Anyways, as far as the people that are still breeding and participating, thank you for doing that. And I appreciate you taking the time to listen and carry on. So, all right. Have
Absolutely.
a good night.
Well, that's all I've got. Donna, would you like to wrap it up for us?
I'm not sure how to unmute. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. Well, I just wanted to thank everybody. I know there's been comments in the certain forums regarding comments being shut off. Basically, this was an interview. Everybody had the option of sending in questions, and some of those questions would be answered. We pretty much had an outline, so we could keep it all in line and in a reasonable amount of time. We know Kent is very passionate, and we appreciate his time and efforts. And Jason, thank you so much for everything you did to put this together. And Janine, special thanks goes out to you for bringing this to light and involving the Education Committee. And I want to do a fast shout out to Kim McNamara and to Lynn Goswick for making sure we had a donation link available in the store. And I just want to say goodnight to everybody and thank you for joining us. And we hope to be able to bring you more. This was a learning experience and a really fun evening. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Just saying, Donna.